Hello. Okay, so today we're going to be making a Texas sheet cake, which is just a cake in a pan. I'll show you guys the type of pan. Usually they're like this. You can also put them in the glass baking pans, which I will also show you. Here we go. This is the other one. It looks a little cloudy because I already sprayed it and it's prepared to bake in my oven. The other thing that you could do with the pan is you could grease and flour it. So all that would include would be getting some Crisco or butter. Crisco is actually better for this because butter sometimes leaves a crispy edge around it, which some people like, I do, but some people do not. So you get a paper towel, scoop up some Crisco, rub it on the bottom, the sides, the corners, and then you get some flour, put it in the pan and kind of tap it around so that it goes around the bottom and the edges and everything. And that will also keep your cake from sticking. I like to use the cooking spray because it's quicker and it's easier and it's not as messy. So that's what I use. Um, so a Texas sheet cake is also a type of butter cake, which was just like the vanilla cake. This recipe is going to be a little bit different. You will see that there are not as many eggs and there's more butter. Also does not have oil in it, and it has the addition of sour cream. So sour cream is going to be our acidic ingredient, which is going to activate the baking soda in the recipe, which is our leavening agent. So remember when we talked about leavening agents with the quick breads and everything? Well, it's the same type of thing. Cakes are very similar to quick breads and muffins. So I'm going to start by combining some of my dry ingredients, which include 2 cups of white sugar. And this cake's really nice because the frosting's almost like an icing, and you put it on it when the cake is still warm. So you don't have to wait for it to cool off. So if you're looking for a quick cake to make, a sheet cake is very quick. And it bakes a lot faster because it's a thinner cake. It's not like a layer cake where, you have to wait 30, 40 minutes for it. Okay, I'm just grabbing my flour. I need 2 cups of flour. Okay, so I need a teaspoon of baking soda, which remember is my leavening agent. It's going to help my cake spread and rise a little bit. Half a teaspoon of salt. Remember what salt does? It counteracts the sweetness and it helps to strengthen the gluten in our cake, which we don't want a ton of gluten in the cake because we do want it to have a soft, tender crumb like a muffin or a quick bread, but we do want it to be, tougher than, say, a pie crust where you want that to be just fall apart kind of. Okay, so I'm going to use my whisking attachment here to mix my dry ingredients together. And then I am going to be adding in my sour cream and my eggs. So it's going to take half a cup of sour cream and 2 eggs. And then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to melt my butter in a pan, or you could do it in the microwave. Either one would be fine. And then you add the water and the cocoa powder. Okay, so my sour cream. If you do not have sour cream at home, the only other thing that I can think that would be very similar to add would be plain Greek yogurt. So if you have that instead, that would work. I know a lot of these recipes use buttermilk also as the acidic ingredient, but I'm not 100% sure of the differences in using sour cream and buttermilk because buttermilk is a liquid and sour cream is not. So you would probably have to cut back on some of the other liquids if you used buttermilk instead of sour cream. All right, so the sour cream is in there. And I have my 2 eggs right here. And if you have a hand mixer instead of a stand mixer, that would be just fine for this. They work really well when you're making cakes because the batter is not as thick as like a dough, like a cookie dough. So I'm going to use my paddle attachment now. Only because I'm not adding a lot of liquid and it's going to end up being pretty thick. So everything would get stuck in my whisk attachment. All right, so what you're going to end up with kind of like looks like a dry type of dough. Almost looks like a cookie dough right now. And I'm just mixing it until it's combined. And then I'm going to stop because remember, we have our leavening agent in there and I don't want to overmix it right now. The thing that I do want to do though is scrape down the sides of my pan and the bottom because the paddle was not picking up the stuff in the bottom. Okay. All right, perfect. Okay, so right now I am adding in a cup of butter, which is 2 sticks, into my saucepan to melt. You'll notice that this is quite a bit of butter, and remember, it is a butter cake. So it's going to be very moist, and it's going to have a small crumb, and it's going to be pretty sweet. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let that melt on low. And then I'm going to add a cup of water, and I'm going to add 5 tablespoons of unsweetened cocoa powder. I'm going to let the mixture boil after that, and I'll talk to you in a minute about that. Okay, so if you wanted this process to go faster with the melting of the butter, you could start with room temperature butter. You could even melt it in the microwave and then transfer it over here to your saucepan. But once it's done, I'm going to go ahead and add my water and my cocoa powder. So it is 5 tablespoons of cocoa powder, which is about 1/3 of a cup. 1/3 of a cup is 5 tablespoons plus 1 teaspoon. So I'm just going to use my 1/3 cup measuring cup to add my cocoa powder in. After it comes to a boil, you're going to take it off the heat, and you need to let it cool a little bit because you're going to be mixing it into your mixture that you did with either your stand mixer or your hand mixer, and that has eggs in it. So remember what I was talking about the vanilla cake. If you put a hot mixture into anything with eggs, with uncooked eggs, it will start to cook the eggs, and they're going to get curdled and get gross. And we don't want half like chunky pieces of egg in your delicious Texas sheet cake. So we are going to let it cool a little bit. Okay, so I have my cooled off chocolate mixture, and I actually transferred it to a liquid measuring cup just to make it easier to pour into here so that it wouldn't spill out. Sometimes that happens with pans. So I'm going to turn this on low, and I'm going to start adding my chocolate mixture slowly. And then once it's completely combined, I am going to transfer it into my 10 by 11 or 11 by 15 pan, I'm sorry. And you want to make sure that your mixer's on low because this does make it pretty liquidy. I'm going to pause it and just scrape down the sides and bottom of my bowl. Got all kinds of stuff hanging out in the bottom. You could actually switch to your whisk attachment at this point if you wanted to. Give one more mix here. Okay. Once I put this in the oven, I'm going to get started on my frosting icing mixture. It's a little bit different than a typical frosting, just because you put it on when it's warm, so it does affect the end result. All right, I'm just going to give this one more go around with my rubber spatula to make sure that it's all mixed in. There's some more stuff hanging out on the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and pour it into my pan. It's almost going to end up being like a very cakey brownie. Okay, so not like the fudgy ones that we made before, more cakey. So in my preheated oven, which I set at 350, this is going to take about 20 minutes. And you're just going to check to make sure it's done with a toothpick in the center of the cake. Okay, so over here in my large saucepan, I am going to be making my frosting. So I just put the cake in the oven. I'm going to add 6 tablespoons of milk, which happens to be 3 ounces. Sometimes it's easier to measure it that way rather than trying to be very careful with your tablespoons. So 3 ounces of milk. I'm going to use another 5 tablespoons or a third of a cup of cocoa. And I'm going to put in half of a cup of butter. Okay, so just like before, I'm going to bring this one to a boil. And then I'm going to remove it from the heat, and I'm going to add my other ingredients in. So the remaining ingredients after this is what's going to make it sweet. It's our 4 cups of powdered sugar, or confectioner's sugar, and a teaspoon of vanilla. You have the option of adding a cup of chopped walnuts. So after you add the powdered sugar and the vanilla and you get everything mixed together, you have the option to add those walnuts to fold them in. Some people do not like nuts. That's why I'm saying that it's optional here. All right, so something important for you guys to realize when you're waiting for this to boil is you need to make sure that you have the heat on low. Otherwise, that chocolate starts to burn really easily to the bottom of the saucepan and it will ruin the frosting. And it's really important to make sure that it does boil, because if it doesn't, that's going to affect the end texture of your frosting. It's not going to help dissolve the powdered sugar all the way when you put it in there, and that's something that you need to happen. Otherwise, you're going to end up with chunks of cocoa and chunks of powdered sugar in your frosting, so you won't have a smooth frosting like you should. Okay, so my mixture is boiling. I'm going to take it off the heat, and I'm going to add in my teaspoon of vanilla. And my 4 cups of powdered sugar. So 4 cups of powdered sugar is actually just a tad bit more than a pound. So the bags that they sell in the store are usually a pound or 2 pounds. So if you were making this, you should get the bag that is 2 pounds instead of 1. There's about 3.5 cups in a pound of powdered sugar. So now, if you didn't want it as sweet or you wanted your frosting a little bit more runny, you could just add a pound of powdered sugar. Just remember that it's going to affect your end product. And it might not come out as the original recipe had stated. So I'm just going to mix this until it's completely combined and I've gotten rid of my lumps of powdered sugar. You could even use a hand mixer at this point if you wanted to speed this process up a little bit. You could use a whisk. I'm just using a wooden spoon. Actually, I might have to switch to a whisk because I don't want these lumps in here that I see. Okay, so you guys can see the frosting is smooth and creamy, which is why, like I said, it's more of an icing rather than a frosting. Because we melted the butter and, you know, it's warm now, and it's going to end up getting almost like a crunchy type of skin on top once it cools on the cake. And it might end up getting a little bit of a crunchy skin in your pot, and that's fine. That's the way it's going to be. It's not going to be like a regular buttercream like we did with the cupcakes. It's going to be different. Well, you guys, I'm not 100% sure what happened here, but my cake looks like it has some hills and valleys going on there. I think it had something to do with the heat of my oven not being completely correct. I should have had an oven thermometer in there because it wasn't ready after 20 minutes. And I read the reviews and everybody said, you know, theirs was ready and stuff. So there you go. Even experienced bakers have issues in the kitchen, just like everybody else. Okay, so I have my frosting here, and I'm gonna put it on my warm cake. It'll help it spread better. And this is almost like a liquidy fudge, it looks like. So I think it'll be really good. And it looks like my cake is evening out a little bit, so that's good. It's not as bumpy and lumpy as it was. So remember, if you wanted to add walnuts, you would have done that when after you added the powdered sugar in. But I almost feel like it's something you might want to do at the end. Otherwise, when you're spreading your frosting, you might rip your cake up because it's so warm and tender right now. Okay, so I'm going to use my straight edge spatula just to gently spread this. And remember, your pan is hot, so be careful when you're spreading your frosting that you don't touch the pan. And all kinds of things beeping behind me. You do want to wait until this cools to eat it. Number one, because you don't want your cake to fall apart. And number two, your frosting is just going to kind of like ooze off of it if you cut into it right now. So you want to give the frosting a chance to solidify on there. And that's it. I'll pick up the computer so you guys can see the finished product. There it is, evened out. Not too shabby. Okay, so that is how you make sheet cake. Really easy, simple cake to make. You don't have to worry about portioning things out in a cupcake pan or stacking up the layers when you're done. You could even decorate this cake, so it's simple. All right, so good luck, you guys. The recipe is in Google Classroom, and I hope you try it. I hope you make it. I hope you like it. There's also white sheet cakes if you don't like chocolate. Okay,